Okay, if y'all want to just gather close, huddle up, whatever, it's a fairly small group. I think things will show up better. Hyler and some of you know that the last time I tried to do this, I had a vapor lock, couldn't even think of a name. So maybe that won't happen today. I don't claim to be an LP gas expert. I do know some things about them, and I'm willing to get up here and do this. Some of y'all that I talk to routinely, I learn something from you all the time. So, you know, there's people in here that know about, more about some parts of this thing probably than I do. Welcome your input. But I know there's at least one person in here that's thinking about buying his first LP tractor, so you don't hardly know how to tailor a talk. So, you know, some of it's going to be very boring for some of you in places probably, and some of it's not. I'll take questions as we go. If you get me chasing rabbits very long, I want to try to do this in an hour. If it turns out it's not what you expected, don't suffer through it. You're welcome to leave. If I don't get through in an hour and you're a diehard and want to see the rest of it, you're welcome to, or whatever. But I just put a little thing up here about why I collect LP gas tractors, because people ask me that all the time. One of them's identity. Where we grew up, Horn and some of us grew up, a gasoline tractor was as rare for us as an LP tractor would be to some of y'all. I mean, all of our rice wells were on either natural gas or LP. It was just a very common fuel type in our area. It was abundant. It was a nickel a gallon. Made horsepower equal to gasoline. You couldn't steal it with a siphon hose. And so it just a lot of reasons that it was very, very popular. And familiarity, because I grew up around them, I'm just more familiar with them. I struggle greatly working on gasoline tractors, as some of y'all know. You know, some of the rarest models are LPs. And when I first started collecting, I kind of learned from collecting toys. I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to collect rare tractors, or at least if I'm going to spend the money to restore them, I'm going to restore rare tractors, because it doesn't cost any more to restore a rare one than it does a common one. And I just happen to be lucky to live in an area where a lot of them work. I like them. The leaks don't ruin the paint. Shouldn't have any leaks, but if you do, I can never get all the leaks out of a gasoline tractor. It never ceases to amaze me how LP's under 100 to 200 pounds of pressure, and I can get all the leaks out of them, and gasoline tractors for me leak like a sieve everywhere gasoline can run out anywhere. So don't fill the crankcase full of gas. First night crack out of the box on my 730 LP high crop that I've got down here. Started it the first day. Went out there the second day to start it for Horn after he come up and helped me put my wheels and stuff on it. Whole crankcase and all the cylinders were full of gasoline. Right? You could have bought it cheap right then, I guarantee you. The gas never goes bad. The 620 LP standard that I've got here hadn't been started in at least 3 years, and charged the battery, it rolled over twice and started. I got ready to bring it down here. Try that with the gasoline. And I mean, can't tell you how many tractors we bought through the years sitting in a fence row. If the engine's not stuck, stick a battery in them, carry a bottle like that with you, plumb it up to it, and it'll start, and you can drive it home if the tires are up. So that's something. Do what? I'll show you how to take the bottle of gas and crack it off here in just a minute. You don't want the regulator on it. You got to make up a hose that doesn't have a regulator on it. And then I'll show you, I'll get to that point. But I just stuck a few tractor pictures in. That's the factory experimental 60 LP standard that we used to own. It was the first tractor I ever bought. Stroke of luck, I found it right there where I live, and it was going to be the only tractor I was going to ever restore or ever buy. Well, y'all know how that goes. All of you do. But it was pretty unique. It was built as a row crop. Shipped to engineering, and the serial number tag was scrapped, and it was built into the first high seat 60 standard. It just also happened to be an LP. And then about 1957, they decided to sell it, so they had scrapped the tag. So they hand stamped the tag. See, the changeover was 6043,000. You notice that one's 6038036, and so they scrapped the tag. They had scrapped the tag, so they just put that hand stamped tag on it. But just some others that we've had. I mean, there's some nice rare example here. Lee's 430 high crop LP is here. Kenny's S, which is The S we used to own there on the front. We had a 420 ULP at one time. They made 6 of. Jerry might recognize, Deb might recognize that picture. That was when we went to Expo in 2004 when our 830 was the national show tractor. But there's Jerry's 2 under the bottom there, and there's Rusty in the back before it was ever restored. And you know, of course, you know how Cherry would be to get something like that into an Expo. But I told him that was the only way I had to get the 830 there. Horn was my ride, and he wouldn't come unless he brought both tractors. And they set them up and set the display up, and that doesn't do Rusty justice. It was a whole lot worse than it looks there. And people would come up and look at it and say, man, this restorer looks nice. How long is it going to take you to get that one running? And Deb would just grin, reach up there, turn the key, hit the starter pedal first, compression, it'd sit there and bust off, and you could count the fan blades, just tick, 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 tick. We had a ball, it stole the show at the whole.
It ran good till we worked on it.
It ran good till we fixed it. We can't get it running that good since. And I don't want to get to chasing rabbits and go way overtime, but one story I'll have to tell you too, it was a circus getting out of there. And we knew it was going to be, so we had left his transporter at the motel across town rather than where they wanted everybody to park and load. And we said we'd just be better off to drive them. Well, when they let us out the gate, I put Tommy and our daughter, on the 830, and I got on the 60, and when I finally got through the cluster getting out the gate and got out away from everything, and I looked, they weren't there. And so I waited and I waited, went back looking for them. Well, here they come with Horn on the chain. The governor spring had rusted completely in 2 on Rusty. And so they're towing him with a chain, and we're going right through the middle of Moline. And Treva was singing at the top of her voice. She was about, 6 or 7? And Tom Lee's driving, oblivious to everything. People are coming out of houses looking, and when they'd stop at a stoplight, Jerry's brakes weren't real good. So he'd be rolling frantically on the tires trying to get the slack back out of the chain because he knew when the light turned green, the clutch on the 830 was going in, kabam, and here we'd go again. But those were fun days. The first thing I'll tell you that if you don't get anything else out of the seminar, if you're going to work on LP gas tractors, get the book. And that's the original on the left, and the reproduction on the right that Davenport Tractor sells, and there may be some other people sell them too, has exactly the same stuff in there. It's a wealth of information. I'm not a physical chemist, and probably a lot of y'all know more about the characteristics of LP gas than I do. Mostly propane now. It can be propane butane mixtures, but it's mostly propane. We got about an 88-degree typo there where I said propane boils at 44 degrees F. That should be negative 44 degrees F. So the only way it's liquid is under pressure, and it's always trying to escape, and of course anytime it does, then it's going to be in vapor form because of the boiling point being negative 44. Gallon of liquid will result in about 250 gallons of vapor. And if you kind of want to relate to that, if you have an LP tractor and you're running it on vapor, you know that when you turn the vapor valve off before you shut the switch off, it'll just die immediately. If you're running it on liquid, it's going to sit there and seem like it runs forever. 5 minutes probably before it burns it all out, and then it frosts it all up because it's giving off heat. And so anyway, pressures in the tank can, normally in the 100 to 200 pound range, and but on a hot day, when the engine's hot, the pop-off valve will blow, at 325, 312 maybe. And that can happen. Right after lunch, cultivating back in the good old days, we'd always fill them full. We'll talk about that later. We'd fill them full instead of 85%. And just about the time you'd nod off good right after lunch, that pop-off valve would blow right there in your face, and it will wake you up. But the tank contains both liquid and vapor, and that's the book's kind of little illustration of that. I like the cats trying to get out, but the way you can burn liquid or vapor both off of the tank is the vapor valve just has a tube that goes up to the top, so it's picking up gas all the time instead of liquid, and it is always trying to escape, and that's just another one of their deals. Most people, the main reasons I get from people not wanting LP gas tractors, they say they're scared of them. Afraid they'll blow up, I guess because the tank looks like a bomb. And the same guy that's scared of an LP tractor will be smoking a cigarette when he's pouring gas in a gasoline. I've never got that. I mean, I've seen a whole lot more gasoline tractors burned down than I've ever seen LPs burned down. Now, if you do get an LP fire, it can be kind of exciting, but, and it is heavier than air. So, I mean, if you do have some escapes and stuff, it is going to collect at floor level in your shop or that type of thing. And somebody, I'm trying to remember who, Steve Just maybe blew both doors out of his shop one time with one that was leaking. But I'm just going to kind of touch on some basic areas, and I'm going to spend most of my time on the fuel system because that's what's different, the main thing that's different about LP tractors compared to others. But I do want to touch on a couple of other things there. So we'll just kind of talk a little bit first about compression and then fire, and spend most of the time on the fuel system, and then some on miscellaneous stuff, just tricks and trinkets and goodies and different things. First thing about LP engines is their high compression. That is just an example I picked from a 720 that gives you the compression ratios that you can read them without me reading them to you, the compression ratios for all fuel, gasoline, and LP. And then it also gives you over there, if you were sticking a compression gauge in it on an engine that's up to spec, about what it ought to be reading. So they are finicky about compression, and you know, back in the old days when we called it spudding in LP, but back when everybody was converting A's and G's, started back in the 40s, to LP gas, it took us a while to figure out you needed to raise the compression ratio. So when you converted an all fuel G over to LP, needless to say, it just didn't have a whole lot of spunk. But we finally figured out how to handle that. The first thing, I left the main point off of that slide on compression. Just do whatever it takes to make sure it's spot on. Now, like anything else, they'll run with some wear, just like any other tractor. But if you want them to really start right, thump right, idle right, really sound good, just do whatever it takes to get the compression up to spec. And I'm not going to go into all kinds of ways to do that. I mean, a lot of times, if they haven't broken a ring or something, they typically don't wear the bores a lot. They'll tend to wear the top ring lands more. We'll talk about that just a little bit. They do tend to burn exhaust valves because that's why they had hardened valve seats. They had valve rotators on the exhaust valves because they do tend to burn exhaust valves. And a lot of times on just an off-the-farm tractor, a lot of times just a good valve sharpening job is for us getting the compression back up where it ought to be. Sometimes it's really all it needs. But I do complete tear downs on mine. And I've got a magician for a machinist, and I just do whatever he tells me it needs. And you can't just bore one and go grab a rebore kit like you can for a gasoline. LP pistons are hard to find. They only made them in standard in 45 over. 45 overs are really tough. And now I know one guy sitting here that's had some made. There's all kind of tricks to doing a lot of the different things I'm going to talk about. We sort of have our own ways of doing that, but you got to get that part figured out. They do tend to lose more compression around the top ring land if it gets worn. That a lot of times they do in the taper in the bore itself. And so I'm kind of a fanatic about doing that. Don't worry too much about fire scoring on the pistons. I'll show you an example of that. That happens to be how they raise the compression in the Buick LP. I don't know whether Lee White will recognize that or not, but that's the day he brought his 430 LP high crop. He's kind of struggled to get some of the powers that be in the hobby to accept that as having all the characteristics all the other 430 LP high crops have had. And that was the day we tore it down at our shop, and it had stuck all LP pistons in it that have been in there for a coon's age, but they just have a little bit of dome to them on the top, all the way across the top, instead of being flat. A Waterloo tractor piston just has a dome on part of the piston up there on the top, kind of fit the combustion chamber, was the way they raised the compression on them. There's the fire scoring I'm talking about on the top. I mean, that looks kind of scary when you first yank the piston out of it and look at it, but unless it gets back to where it's really pitted down into the top ring groove or something where the top ring is not going to seal off, I don't really worry about it. I mean, I guess if they were readily available, I might change them out, or if I wanted to build me some new ones, then I'd build me some new ones and go on. But But, and that's just an example there. I've got a 730 LP standard that I say I'm working on. It's been torn down in my shop about 4 years with nothing done to it. But the reason it got torn down is it didn't start right. I didn't really want to restore it. And when I finally just kept getting into it a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, it had been bored 125 over and had gasoline pistons in it. And that was the reason it was such a bear to start. It didn't accelerate right, that kind of thing. And I tore down a parts tractor, and my machinist didn't like the way the top ring groove looked, so he just double cut it and put 2 compression rings in the top ring groove there. Most of the time, he'll just cut it a little bit, put a shim under or above the top ring that goes completely inside the piston groove. But just anything it does takes to square that up. But, you know, people ask me all the time, why are you going to tear that motor down? This was in a little 530 that was right there in the neighborhood. I tried to buy it for years. In fact, the guy ran me off the last time I tried to buy it. And I saw him out in his yard one day, and I told Tom Lee, I said, I just want to show you how nice this little 530 LP is. Maybe you won't run us off for me, just want to show it to you. And I walked up and I said, you going to run me off for trying to show your tractor to my wife? And he said, no, I'm going to sell you the tractor. and started it up and drove it home. Ran like a top. You could tell the head had already been done on it, so somebody had already taken care of that. And somebody said, well, why are you going to tear that motor down? And I said, well, because if I'm going to paint it and I'm going to restore it, I've got to know what's in there. And shoved the first piston out of it, set over the bench. I stuck it setting up. I was probably on the 3rd or 4th beer, and I got ready to shove the second one out, and I just looked under my arm, and I thought, damn, I don't remember them rods looking like that before. And if you look at it, I mean, it's like that, and the piston like that far coming to the top, and had for most of its life, the ring groove on that side was that far down compared to the other one. I might have never known it, you know, if I'd have just gone on with it. But to me, you just don't know, and after you get one painted, it's not the time to find out that something's not right with it. The Waterloo heads have the same casting number on them as a gas head. And they had hardened valve seats and exhaust valve rotators. The Dubuque heads, a little bit different. They took a gasoline head, all right, and up there on top, and that picture's got a shadow on it that doesn't show up very well, but up here on top, underneath the water manifold, the casting number for a gas head would have been right there. And then on an LP, they just machined that off, and that Lee will recognize that picture. That's your head too. And it's just stamped M4043T. And what they did also when they did that is they machined the combustion chambers, you know, in a gasoline head, that's flat right there. And they just machined that enough to, so the dome on that piston would clear it. And we have, my machinist has made several of those for people that have just bought the stock gasoline head castings, and that can be done. Fires is where I find most of the problems. I get a lot of people call me about LP tractors, and most everybody that calls me about an LP tractor automatically thinks the problem's with their fuel converter, because that's the part on them that they know the least about. And 9 times out of 10, it's a fire problem. The fire's got to be right on an LP tractor. And understand that 6-volt, 12-volt bypass starting thing, or get rid of it. And my choice has been to get rid of it. I run electronic ignitions in all of mine. I think they fire a little bit hotter. I found them to be a lot more dependable. Horn runs points in all of his. He doesn't have any problem with it. I got points in mine. If I get ready to start 6 tractors, I got to have 4 sets of points. And you can't look at them and tell there's anything wrong with them. And I've tried the $5 points and I've tried the $40 points. And to me, I found them equally unreliable. He has no trouble with them at all. So I run Autolite 386 spark plugs in the Waterloos. The 15 thousandths gap, I don't know how critical that is, and I've never been able to find the service bulletin. But there's a guru that we all have at home named Mr. Jack Duck that's forgotten more about this stuff than all of us in here together know. And he was a mechanic at the John Deere place all of the years. He's told me there's a service bulletin, or there was a service bulletin that came out that said to gap them at 15 thousandths. I've not found the bulletin, and he hadn't either. It probably doesn't make a nickel's worth of difference in the way the tractor's gonna start and run for what we do with them. But he never told me anything else I found to be undependable, so I gapped mine at 15,000. Copper spark plug wires and timing at 20 degrees before dead center at wide open throttle, now, again, I'm talking Waterloos. And if it's a 2-digit Waterloos, 50s, 60s, and 70s are timed on 15 degrees. But the fire's gotta be right.
Oh,
Yes.
I have, you convert all yours to 12 volts, and I've had I just want the public to know that I've had problems with the electronic ignition on 6 volts.
You will, and I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to, because when I get to a little bit on Dubukes, I'm gonna talk about converting mine to 12 volts and why. But yes, the 6-volt electronic ignitions are trouble because the starter pulls so much juice, the electronic ignition doesn't get enough. And even the electronic ignition guy told me that. When I got ready to buy my first one, I was gonna put it on a Dubuque. And he said, I wish you were putting it on a Waterloo, because he said, I don't think you're gonna be happy with the, I found them to be decent, fairly well okay on a gasoline tractor, but not an LP. And that's just the ones I use, and that's sort of what it looks like. I mean, it does look a little bit different with those 2 wires out. Now, that's on a Dubuque. On a Waterloo, the way I stab my distributors, where the clips are parallel with the tractor, then it's kind of around on the back, and you don't even notice it. But and people ask me all the time, well, have you ever had a bad one? Until the other day, I could have told you no. But when I did the first startup on the 730, first compression, when we were videoing it from my main case up restoration, the first time I ever rolled that tractor over on compression, it started and hit 4 licks and quit. And I thought it was fire. But I messed with it a while and messed with it a while, thought it blew a fuse, messed with it, hit it again, it rolled over one time, started and ran for probably, 10 minutes. I did all of my checks on it and shut it off, and then Jared come help me mount the tires, and that's when I found the crankcase full of gas. When I got all that straightened out, it hit 2 licks and quit. 2 licks and quit. Every time I'd hook it up and unhook it, it hit 2 licks and quit. And I finally went and cut the ignition out of another tractor and put it in it, and it's run fine since. So that's the only trouble I've ever had with them, but it has happened to me now. So, okay, I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time on the fuel system and just kind of break it down into the tank, the strainer, the converter, and the carburetor, because those are the parts that are different. That's just kind of John Deere's little schematic, but you know, the tank up here where you put the fuel in it, this is obviously a 60 or 70. The withdrawal valves were down here under this panel, and that's where your little keep valves closed decal goes on them. I don't have a slide of that later. Later on, they moved them up there on the operator station where it was a lot handier. And then, of course, you go from the withdrawal valve to the strainer, and the strainer to the converter to carburetor, and we'll kind of break all that down a little bit. Just a parts breakout on it is some of the stuff we'll be talking about. We'll talk about the filler valves. We'll talk about the little 85% bleed, the relief valve, the gauge, the withdrawal valve. And you always have a hose here that connects the 2 withdrawal valves, and then this is going to go down to the strainer. And the reason you got those 2 valves connected together, that way so you could withdraw vapor or liquid, or I guess both if you wanted to. And then that's just kind of what it looks like on one of the tractors where you've got the strainer, the converter, carburetor, etc. And I'm going to tangle up in these cords before I'm there. There it is on the Dubuque. They did it a little bit different. Somebody asked a while ago, this is a pretty good example to show that. He said, how do you hook a cooker bottle up to one? Regardless of the tractor, in fact, it doesn't show it. Well, it kind of does. Right here, this cap that would go, there's always going to be a T somewhere that in the line going down to the strainer. And there it is on a Dubuque. 2 different ones of these, but there's a cap right there. And you just screw that cap off and make you up a hose. At one end of it will go in the LP tank, the other end of it has a fitting, just like would go to the converter. and hook her up right there, and you can drive her home. You're sure not going to pour any in it out of a 5-gallon bucket. Is that good enough on that? Okay. All right, the tank. You got a gauge on it. You got what we call an 80% bleed or a valve that'll, when it starts spewing liquid out, it's telling you that the tank is 85% full. John Deere says don't fill it any fuller than 85%. We used to cheat all the time and run it till it ran out the top bleed, because if you were pulling them hard, if you started early in the morning, you were hard pressed to get to lunch. And at lunch, if you ran late, you were really hard pressed to get to dark, without having to put fuel in them. But relief valve and then the fill valves where you put the fuel in it at the top, and the withdrawal valves are all in the tank. The gauges can be a pain. They can be fixed. We'll talk about that a little bit. And the gaskets can leak. You always want to be thinking about where all the places an LP gas tractor can leak, because you shouldn't smell anything around an LP tractor. If you smell anything, or if you got any green flies around it, we call them butane flies at home. You'll never see them anywhere but around an LP leak. If you got green flies around it, you got a leak. There's the gauge on a 530, and it's just a little gizmo type gauge there. There's one out of a tractor that's kind of a factory replacement, and the way the gauge works, of course, this end of it's all down in the tank. Here's the gasket that I was talking about that could leak. There's 4 screws that hold it. Goes down in the tank, and it's just a float. But where they mess up, what did I do? Locked up.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
On that gasket, like all other John Deere gaskets, is it discouraged to put any out of Permatex or any sealant?
I don't on them. I put them on dry because they're pretty thick. Now, I don't know that you couldn't, but I just have always put mine on dry. Gracie, it's okay if they talk during my talk. She knows people are not supposed to be talking during my talk. But no, y'all ask questions. But there's the business end of it right there. It's a little geared gizmo, and it's not built very stellar. And when they get a little bit of wear in them, the gears will slip. And then you got a line fuel gauge.
He agrees with you.
I watched them drag a 730 LP high crop all over the grounds at Expo one year. One guy had bought it, and the guy he'd sold it to, they drug it all over the yard, and before they came got me. And then it was just a stroke of luck, because I looked at it, it was showing 40% in the fuel tank, and I thought, well, it's a fire problem. And just the thing to always double check, get up there and open that bleed on top, that little 85% bleed on top, and if they don't nothing come out, you're done. And sure enough, it was out of fuel with a fuel gauge showing 40%. So the liquid level and the relief valve, the liquid level, I said you said at 85% full. We'll talk about the tags in a minute that are on them. And the relief valve set at 312 pounds. And I'm not going to go into relief valve. I don't worry about them at the level we're working the tractor. Sometimes they'll leak a little bit. And if they leak, then you can't get it to quit leaking, but just spraying some stuff in it and beating around and what have you, then you'll have to replace it. But it's hard to find the original looking ones. Jerry said he found one for one of his tractors, but I don't worry about them. I don't worry about testing them or anything, because at the level of fuel we're putting in them, and we're not working them hard and all of that, I'm not worried about one blowing off or blowing up or anything like that. So I just pretty much leave them alone. This is the little bleed I was talking about at the top. When you open that, nothing but gas and nothing but vapor is going to come out until the tank gets 85% full, and then it starts spewing liquid. And when it starts spewing liquid, then you shut it off, and you're supposed to shut the gas off. These tags, there's only, at least my belief is, there's only 2 kinds. All of the early ones were brass. And this is actually a new old stock one here. Our brass painted red with the letters and the rim that stick up a little bit higher, showing the brass color. Somewhere late in the 30 series, they changed those to aluminum tags, and they have a black background. I didn't have a 30, I don't have a lot of 30 series tractors. I'm a black dash 20 guy. But I didn't have one late enough to show the aluminum tag and the black background. The ones you buy in the kits and stuff have a green background, and in my opinion, that simply isn't right. I think somebody just took a tractor that had been painted and thought that's the way they were supposed to be, because that's the only two ways I've ever seen them from the factory. There's one that Trav Jordy had a lady school teacher fix for me on the Waterloo tractors where they're up under the hood. I don't worry about them too much. That was on the Dubuque, sticking right out the top where you can see them. I bead blasted it and sent it to him, and he had a school teacher rebuild it, and I think you used the same lady, didn't you? And I was real pleased with what she did. In fact, after she did mine, she said, I think I've learned something that would enable me to do them a little better. After that, it's held on by a little snap ring behind it, little bitty snap ring. And what I do on that, when I put it back together, I take some fine wire and I beat that snap ring up. Because when that thing gets a little bit of wear around it, it'll fall down around the snap ring, and then it kind of looks dorky when it falls down around the top of the tank. The filler and the vapor return. Those are two things that normally need attention. New is better, and we'll talk about that. You can still buy them new, 20, 25 bucks a piece. They just don't look like the originals. They're better than the originals in the state that most of the originals are now. We try to save our originals and use them where they show. Where they show would be Horns Orchards or anybody that's got an LP orchard or the Dubuque tractors. And so we try to save our best originals and rebuild them and put them on the tractors where they show. I'm an originality nut, but I finally gave up on the Waterloos where they're up under the hood and you can't see them. I just go buy the new ones. The vapor return is easy to rebuild. We'll talk about that. Very common source of leaks. Just kind of a trivia thing, up there where they're located, they both say vapor on the tank, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the caps were actually a turquoise color. Up on top of the tank, I didn't pick a good example, but there's a welded tag right here, and there's a welded tag right there. And there it is on my 60. You can see this is a filler valve, but it says vapor. And when I saw that, I thought, some Monday morning guy put that dude on there, because any idiot knows that's where you put liquid in it. But the reason they both say vapor is if you withdraw fuel there, you're only going to withdraw vapor. And that's just kind of a trivial thing, but it's in the book. And we'll talk about the withdrawal valves a little bit later, but this would be what we call a vapor return valve, where you got a little stopper in there that you push down. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And then the liquid fill valve kind of has a faucet washer looking thing. You can take them apart right here. They screw out right there to rebuild them. All LP valves basically have a safety on them too. Here, 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 so if something goes wrong, you don't just dump the tank in your face. Theoretically, you could screw the center out of any of those valves and you shouldn't have very much fuel escape at all. Like if you wanted to rebuild one or do something to it, don't trust it. Because 90% of the ones you take out of the tank, that if it's been in there forever, that safety valve is long since gone. And you screw one of them out expecting it to be there and it's not, you're in for a hell of a surprise.
You can hear it if it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you screw the bleeder on, that I'm going to show you in a minute on the way I fill my tanks, if you start letting fuel out that bleed too quickly, it'll shut it off. You'll hear it shut off. But don't ever count on one being there. That's the new type filler valves. I mean, you can still buy those. Any of your dealers that deal with Gas Equipment Company, and I guess most of them do, they're the distributors for most of the stuff that's left.
27 bucks for that valve and 28 bucks for the kit.
Yeah, and I'll show you the kit. I'll show you how to rebuild them. But the valves are cheaper than buying the kits. That's the kit there for the vapor bleed or the vapor return valve is very easy to rebuild. The fill valve is not so easy to rebuild. If you want the original valve in it and you've got it, then that rebuild kit there is very easy to put in. You just take it apart, put the kit in it. That's the filler valve, what gives trouble is this faucet washer looking thing right there. Now they make a kit. I don't know whether did you get a kit for yours?
Yes, sir.
It's not exactly like that unless somebody had some old ones stuck back. They got some little ears on them you got to grind off. They don't have near as much taper to them, and I've had trouble getting them to seat. In fact, a lot of times when I take the hose off, I'll have to take a screwdriver and stick in there and kind of wiggle it around a little bit and center it to get it sealed off. So that's why I'm saying if they don't show, it's just easier to go buy the new one and they don't give any trouble. But I'd also think somebody makes, probably some hardware store, makes a faucet washer that if somebody put a little bit of effort into it, it probably...
That's what I was gonna do if I hadn't had a kit, guys, kit.
Right. That's just a poor example of a cap showing that they never were green. They typically were that color. I found some better than the picture that I showed and just had some paint made up to paint mine with, but they were a turquoise, kind of a turquoise blue color from the factory. You can look at a couple of sets we painted on Jerry's tractors out there, and they may not be spot on, but they're pretty close. And just
Pot metal or plastic?
those are pot metal. The new ones you get are plastic, but the pot metal ones were the ones that were blue. And the other thing about those valves, they're a common source of a leak, and they have a gasket. There's a gasket in there that cap screws up against, and you'll think you could screw that cap up tight enough to keep them from leaking, and you really can't. I mean, they'll still manage to push gas out, not in any big amount or anything, but enough to where you can smell it, and enough to where you can get you some butane flies if you hadn't seen any. The withdrawal valves, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on them than the other stuff. Most common source of leak on the tractor, period. A little bit about how they work, a little bit about kits, a little bit about old style kits and new style kits. And if you like what I'm going to have to say about the new style stuff, then you want this phone number right here to Tim Andrews, because Tim is making the adapters that we're going to talk about that it takes to make the new style kits work with the square handle type handles that we all want on our tractors. And then also any dealer with access to Gas Equipment Company, and also there's a company called Carbon Turbo, I believe in Minnesota. I think that's where they are. But sometimes you can get some stuff from them. I don't get a lot of stuff from them because I can generally get mine somewhere else. But the business end of that thing is this little piece right here. This is what, I don't know who named it that, they call it a bonnet nut. That bonnet nut, and I'll show you in a minute, screws out of the valve, and you can rebuild all that with the valves in the tank. If you don't have any other reason to take the valve out of the tank, you don't really have to. You just screw it apart right here, and this is the business end of it right here. When you open the handle, this piece pulls away from the seat right here and lets fuel come from here out to your line, and this little diaphragm or little rubber washer right there is what goes bad. That's just a new old stock valve out of a 730. Here's the bonnet nut, the screws out. Some of them have got drive screws that stake them, and a lot of them don't, but this is the part that we're going to be talking about screwing out. Also, if you're interested in collecting 30 series tractors and you're buying one sight unseen, or you're thinking about buying it, you want somebody to send you a picture of the dash where these stems right here stick through the dash, because that bonnet nut, in John Deere's infinite wisdom, they made the hole in that dash almost big enough to get a socket through there. I think it's 1.1 I think, on there. And that hole is so close, you'll wiggle and you'll hold your mouth every way you can think to hold it. You'll even tap on it a little bit with a hammer because you think you can get it in there and you can't. And so the whole dash has to come off to change those, and to get the whole dash off of a 30 series tractor is not that easy. I mean, and so what happened? I've seen them cut out every way you can think of. Chiseled out, beat out, torched out. Now that took somebody with some pretty good size ones to take a torch and cut that hole out with a leaking LP valve, you know. But anyway, I've seen it done. I've seen the whole fronts cut out of the dash. So look for that if you're, and a lot of times they don't butcher them up so bad they can't be fixed. But that's what it looks like when it's screwed apart. This is the part that turns the gas off right here, up in there. This is the part that leaks. This rubber washer right here is the gasket that goes in here and seals all that off. And when it goes bad, the gas goes right by the stem. It'll still turn off, but when you turn it on, the gas comes right out by the stem. And also, I'm going to tell you to clean threads up in a minute. This is the threads I'm talking about. When you take this out to rebuild it, clean the threads up to the point that you can screw that in and out of there by hand and not feel any resistance on it, because the torque is 22 foot-pounds. And it'll tell you that in your kit if you use a rebuild kit, and you have to use Loctite. The rebuild kit will come with a little tube of red Loctite. And you Loctite those threads, and I mean 22 foot-pounds is not much. And you'll say, man. But the reason is, if you raunch down on that thing like you think you ought to hold 200 pounds of pressure, you cut that diaphragm on a brand new kit. And then you're right back out of business again. So, and the reason for the Loctite is so when you open the valve, it opens the valve. It don't screw the bonnet nut out, because that's a big surprise too. If you screw that bonnet nut out and that safety on the back happens not to be there.
It gives that 12 foot-pounds an inch pound.
It gives it in inch pounds. It's like 250 inch pounds. And so make that conversion divided by 12. Because if you set her down to 250 foot-pounds, which is about what you think you ought to, keep that thing from blowing out of there, then you just ruined a good kit.
Is that a right-handed nut or a left-handed?
The bonnet nut is right-handed. It screws out right. And so when you screw the bonnet nut out, when you screw this out, then this is your, the square piece out here is where your handle goes, and that all screws through that bonnet nut and comes out the front. And this is what's bad on them when it's leaking. And it just slides out of that slot, and you can buy the repair kit, and that's just with the old one out and the new one over there on the other side waiting to go back in. That's one way to rebuild it. And on all of the tractors but the 30 series, you can get to those real easy, whether it's a Dubuque or a 630 or whatever. So if you happen to mess one up or you happen to get a bad one, you just change it out. On a 30 series, you don't really want to take a chance on messing one up or getting a bad one if you don't pre-test it, because then the whole dash has got to come out again. The better way to do it, and actually if you order new valves from John Deere right now, I think you can still get them. Didn't you say, Mike, that you got some from Deere? Or did I bring that up? From a gas company? Anyway.
Yes, you got the gas company,
Yeah.
but they weren't square on that.
Right. The new stuff you get is a much better way to rebuild it. You just screw all that stuff I was showing you out and throw it away, and this whole new piece goes in there in the part of the valve that you left in the tractor, and that's an all O-ring seal. They never give any trouble. The problem is the end of the stem looks like that. It's a little oval gizmo that your handle won't go on, or your pieces won't fit on, depending on how. We just made for the Dubuque tractors, and like the 530s and the 50s that use that coupler out there, we just made a little square stem, this oval inside, and it just slips down over there. And I think I got a picture. There's your coupler. Just slides right up on it, takes a longer screw, and you got it. I also thought they'd work on a 620-720, so I gave a set of them to Jerry, all proud of them. The problem is, this piece right here, like on a Dubuque or on a 50 or a 520, it will come back here and stop. the handles, like on a 720, won't stop quick enough, and they rub against the back. They need it, and Tim Andrews is supposedly making one of those adapters that'll fit everything and will stop that problem. Here's the set that Tim makes for a 30 series. The top valve up there is a new old stock 730 or 530, 630 valve. This down here is the new old style bonnet that I was telling you about with the funky looking little end on it. And he's just made this brass stem right here with the funky looking end here. And he's got a long screw that goes all the way in here, holds the handle and everything. So when you get those rebuilt in the 30 series, you can't tell them from the originals, and you simply won't have any trouble with it. And I mean, I highly recommend that. That's the way I'm doing all of mine now. It just gets you around a lot of problems. That one is, you used to be able to get that one from Carbon Turbo, the one on the bottom. That's for a new gen that has the threads on it. But if you got it with the threads on it and you wanted to change it over, all you got to do is screw that out and either use your stem and their gizmo here, or just screw it out and use the whole new bonnet system like I've done there with a new adapter on the end of it, and you're good from front to back. What time is it?
13
Am I boring y'all? Okay, because all right. If you get tired, if you get through before I do, you won't hurt my feelings a bit if you get up and leave. So otherwise, we'll just keep doing it. I don't guess anybody's coming in after us, is there? No. Okay, the fuel strainer. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I don't know why they call it a strainer. It really doesn't strain anything. There's nothing to strain, really, in LP gas. Really what it is an electronic shutoff, which is just another safety. You really should have 3 levels of safety. Your withdrawal valves, when you turn them off, that ought to stop everything. There will a little gas over time push by those. If you'll notice, if your tractor set a long time, when you start it the first time, it'll have liquid in the strainer, even though you may not open anything but the vapor valve. They'll just push a little bit through there over time, but then that electronic shutoff is your next safety level, and in your converter, it is the 3rd safety level that you should have of that thing leaking any gas. I'll show you the different types. It ought to click when you turn the switch on. If it don't click, it's not going to start. So no click, no start. A lot of times the plunger's just stuck. I've had a lot of trouble with the gaskets on the early types leaking. Even brand new gaskets, when you start smelling a little butane and start putting the soap bubbles or different stuff that you use to detect it, you'll see a bubble coming up around some of the screws. Won't be much, just enough you can smell it and get you a butane fly. And they can be rebuilt. And the other thing is that I should have put up there, they're getting very hard to come by. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but there it is on the tractor, and this is the business end of it right here. You got a solenoid coil that when you turn the switch on, it sucks this plunger up, and that plunger lets fuel through from here up and out. And that's the little filter element. You can tell it don't filter much. And that's what clicks. When you turn the switch on and it pops that plunger up out of there, that's what makes the clicking noise. Bill?
730 would not, the magnet in there would not open that thing. It'd open it fine here. You hook the line up to it, but not open it when they got under pressure.
Yeah, if they're weak, it'll click, but it ought to be a snap. And if it's a weak click, a lot of times when you put pressure back on it, it'll shut back off. That's part of the problem. See, the Dubukes were 6 volts. And really all you can get is 12-volt coils. And if you put a 12-volt coil in a 6-volt Dubuque lock-off, it'll make a weak click sometimes, but a lot of times it won't hold it open under pressure. You're exactly right.
So when you click when you got pressure on it?
Right, okay. And there's just one kind of taken apart. I mean, you can buy a kit that has some of this stuff in it. I'm not sure what all. I think you can still buy the coil. Davenport Tractor is a pretty good place to buy those. I know you can buy the gaskets, either him or the boy in New York, the fireman in New York.
Nick Barber.
Barbieri, there you go. to come up with some of that stuff. But a lot of times just taking it apart, cleaning it up, getting the corrosion off the magnet and all of that, a lot of times will straighten them up with a,
Do not take the plunger to your brush on the grinding wheel. That is a rubber tip going against a brass ring.
yeah.
I don't know what you can buy at the butane places, because that whole setup is used on a lot of the forklifts and other things.
Right. The,
About half the price of beer.
well, if you can find them at the butane place anymore. GEC, Century's out of business.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is we call them hand grenades, pineapples, whatever. That was for a 2-digit or a 20 series tractor. If you wanted, it's correct cop, should have that one on it. That would be on a 30 series or a Dubuque. And that's the one you get. That was the replacement from Century. Looks almost like this one. It doesn't have the plug at the bottom, and it's got these little ears around the edge. But it was a whole lot better in one way, in that it used an O-ring to seal it at the top instead of that gasket. They never leak. They never give you trouble. So, but again, I've bought several of those up and stuck them back. But I know GEC at home cannot get them or the Model H converters anymore.
Does anybody make that coil, 6-volt coil?
Not to my knowledge.
So what do you do?
I convert mine to 12. I've got some hoarded, and I get talked out of one every now and then, don't I, Lee? If he's still in here. But anyway, but I convert my Dubuques to 12 volts, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But converters. Spend a little bit of time there, but I'm not going to go into converter rebuild. I mean, that would be a whole seminar within itself, but they basically were three. The Model M4 converter, the Model H converter, and the Dubuque converter, or the Marvel Schiebler, which is a division of Century or vice versa. I don't remember which, but they do three things. And that's the part that most people least understand on a tractor, so they assume that's where their problem is when it doesn't run right. I wouldn't say it's rarely the case, but they don't give as much trouble as a lot of people think. But it converts, first thing it does, it converts high pressure fuel to 6 PSI. So it's converting high pressure fuel to low pressure fuel, it's converting liquid to vapor, and it's dispensing fuel to the fuel system by atmospheric pressure. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because you're not sucking fuel through a venturi in a carburetor that stores fuel like you do on a gasoline. An LP tractor takes fuel altogether different than a gasoline tractor does, and that's what crosses people up. Kind of troubleshooting, it can pass gas. That's been my problem all week. Dr. Cass is kind of finally getting me about lined out. But anyway, you'll kind of know when it's doing that when you turn your clicker on. If you hear the air cleaner bubbling, it'll just sit there and bloop, 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 the air cleaner, and you'll think, what's that? And so you've either got a high pressure valve problem or a low pressure valve problem. We'll talk about those. It can mix coolant and LP. And we'll talk about that in a minute. If you've got an LP tractor and you're getting antifreeze in the oil, don't automatically assume you got a blown head gasket, because it could be coming through the converter, through the carburetor, and into the oil. Or you can also, it's not a real good idea to be smoking when you check the water, because if the backside of the converter's bad, you can get LP into the coolant. So you can get antifreeze in the oil through the carburetor, or you can get LP into the coolant if you have problems on the backside of the converter. They can be rebuilt. Alan Jarose at Davenport Tractor has kits for them. I'll show you how I check mine. If you're ever gathering to the green, I would suggest you go hear Alan's talk. He does an excellent job. He does one whole seminar basically on rebuilding the converters, and he does an excellent job. That's a Model M4 on the left that was on the 2-digit and the 20 series tractor, and that's a Model H on the right that was on the 30 series tractors and the new gen tractors. It was also the John Deere replacement for the M4, and the new converters you buy from Century, if you can find one, are basically Model H converters. this thing right here, of course, here's where the fuel, these are water where coolant goes through it. This is high pressure gas going in here. This is where it takes a lot of volume of vapor going to the carburetor. So you're passing low pressure, high volume gas. This screw right here in the bottom is where you can tell if you suspect you're getting antifreeze in the oil that might be coming from the fuel. Just screw that plug out right there. And if you got antifreeze coming out right there, then you know you got a problem on the back side of the converter. That's a Dubuque converter. Hamilton's going to become our Dubuque converter rebuild expert. Those were pretty sorry when they came out, and I'll show you a conversion kit on that in a minute. But even on the Dubuque tractor, the idle adjustment screw wasn't in the carburetor; it was in the converter. And I've never seen one that worked. Now maybe some of them have. I'll also say the best running Dubuque tractor I ever had still had the original converter on it, and it was still on 6 volts. So you might want to throw everything else I've said about how I do them out. But anyway, they gave a lot of trouble, and John Deere had a rebuild kit years ago to convert them over to Model H converters. There's been a lot of kits. That's just some that I've had. Some of the kits come with a high pressure rebuild system part of them. Some of them don't. I mean, there's all kind of things you can get into on rebuilding them, but that's just some of the kits I had around the house. There's 2 distinct places that converter comes apart. This is the low pressure side of it up here, and there's a plate right here that comes off that gets you into all the low pressure part, which is up here. The plate on the back side, take it off, it looks like a honeycomb. And the reason it does is because back there you've got fuel going through it, you've also got coolant going through it. Because when you start converting liquid to vapor, you're giving up all of that heat. You're taking all of that heat out. And so you gotta warm it up. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. But it's kind of the business side of it. And here is where you got to have a vent. There's going to be a hole in the face of that converter, and that's your atmospheric pressure hole. And it's got to be open. And when your tractor comes back on the intake stroke, you create negative pressure in the intake system, and that's why you got to have an oil cap on, you got to have oil in the breather, and you got to have everything hooked up. And because when it converts negative pressure inside the intake system, atmospheric pressure pushes on this diaphragm, and when it pushes, this is a dual lever converter, this is the Model M4, but when it pushes on these levers, it opens this valve right here, and that's where your high pressure has been converted to 6 psi, and it comes in right here, and then sends fuel to the carburetor. And it's pretty Rube Goldberg's little old valve up there, and they can give trouble, and that's just kind of another look at it, and a look at the outside diaphragm. The way I test mine is I just made me up a little pigtail hose that I chucked one end of it up there. I just screwed the other end on the high pressure side of the converter. You should hear nothing coming out. If there's anything coming out on the water side, then you know you're going to get gas in the coolant. If there's anything coming out where it goes to the carburetor, then you know it's going to bypass gas straight through it when it's not supposed to.
What pressure should you put to it?
I just put whatever's on my air compressor, 100, 125.
That's what I did, 125. Until you touch it, it should stay.
You chuck it up to 125 and you don't hear nothing, and there's 2 ways to test it. You can just take a blunt object and stick in this vent hole and gently push on the diaphragm. I just kind of kiss mine. Now, kissing a converter don't sound real sexy, and it's not. But I just put my mouth over it. You don't even blow on it. You just exert a little bit of positive pressure on that vent hole, and when you do that, then you should hear gas coming out. You should hear air coming out right there. If you go through those checks, put it on the tractor, it's going to run. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's kind of my theory on converters. Changing Dubuques to Model H converters. Like I said, most of those Dubuque converters were not very good to start with. I convert mine to 12 volts because it just simplifies things. One, I can use a 12-volt strainer. Two, I can use a 12-volt electronic ignition, because a 6-volt electronic ignition will not work well on a 6-volt Dubuque LP tractor. You just pulling so much fire off with the starter, it won't crank it. And the 6-volt strainer coils are hard to find, Harvey. And we talked about electronic ignitions, but that's the conversion kit. Basically, Deere years ago was selling a conversion kit that had a template. This plate right here is the plate that the original Dubuque converter mounted to. You obviously use different mounting holes when you mount a Model H converter to it, and Deere sent you the template to show you where to drill your holes. It sent you the new lines and the Model H converter and everything it took to convert it over. If your tractor has still got everything on it, if it's still got the original converter on it, you don't really need a kit. I mean, these lines that I've done on mine are all original. I just took all these fittings out of the old converter and pretty much just used what I had. And I did get a template from Alan Jarose. He sells that whole thing. He can buy the whole kit from him if you don't have the backing plate or any of this plumbing and stuff to start with. You know, if you, for example, you buy one that's been converted to gasoline or whatever, and you kind of got to start from scratch, you can buy all of that from Alan. But the only thing that I do is I use a reducer in the bottom, and I've got a 90 degree. I use a square brass. Come out of that with I think the fitting out of the original one then will screw right into that, and he makes a 90 degree bend hose to go right to the carburetor. You gotta kind of jink around in here on this one, and this is the water one here, to get all that to fit under there right, but it will work, and when you convert it over, you got it. Carburetor, there ain't much to it. And I get a kick out of people talking about, oh, I sent my carburetor to Bubba, and Bubba's carburetor shop, he rebuilt it for $300. I thought, well, man, send me a bunch of them. But, because there's nothing in them. And we'll look at that. I mean, a rebuild normally consists of a new throttle shaft and bushing or seal, same as a gas. So if you just buy a gas rebuild kit, you'll get the throttle shaft and the seal that you need, and it's got 2 O-rings in there. And that's the rebuild on it. This is the high pressure, not the high pressure, but the low jet, idle jets, just like a gasoline. Then you got a gizmo up here called a mixture control valve that most of you would call a choke. It's hooked to the choke lever, but it doesn't choke air like on the gasoline. When you pull it out, basically what it does is pushes this up here against the low jet. It shuts the fuel off. There it is in the closed position. Supposedly it was to help on cold weather starting. I've never pulled one out on one of my tractors. I don't know what they put it on there for. The early 2-digit tractors had a primer on the converter and a button to push. Like the thing ought to have to be primed. I don't know why they put it on there, because you didn't need to prime it. In fact, on the 20 series, they did away with all of that. But I also have a couple of fuel nozzles in here that are staked in with lead. And if you look in your book, there's a procedure for adjusting those. My theory is don't. And the only thing they do, that you adjust them so when the throttles are closed all the way off, that they hit the end of that fuel nozzle just perfectly to make the fuel then flow through the idle jets. If you get an LP carburetor that doesn't want to respond to the idle jets, especially you screw them all the way in and it's running rich, theoretically you're supposed to adjust these, and it's just kind of a feel thing. You just put the throttle shaft in there, you put the butterflies in it, you hold it, feel of it, and you screw these in and out after you finally figure out how to get them loose. And I've never been very successful changing the way my idle jets affected the tractor on those. Jerry and I have chased a couple of carburetors with blue in the face. And we've had a couple of LP carburetors, we just never could get them to run right and never could figure out why. I mean, but also, you'll also see on your butterflies, you have these little snake teeth that come up in the fuel nozzle. And the reason is When you open that throttle, you're not only adjusting air, you're letting more air in, but you also have to let more fuel in. And so you're letting more air, more fuel in at the same time with those little, with the butterflies and the snake teeth deal. And that's just you know, an example of one off the tractor. And there's the business end of it. It doesn't show up great, shows up a lot better here, where you can see the little snake teeth right here going up in the ends of the fuel nozzle. But most of that, just leave it alone unless you have a real reason to think it needs to be worked on. The 2 O-rings on the rebuild go right there and right there. And I mean, that's it. Clean it up, bead blast it, paint it, stick it on there. There's a Dubuque carburetor they basically just used a gas carburetor with some modifications. And I don't know where I'm supposed to advertise that or not, but there's a couple of people that can get a gas carburetor converted to a Dubuque carburetor if you get hung up and don't have one. Fill in the tank. Hey, you can call the truck and have them come out there and pump fuel in it, or you can do it. I've never seen anybody that did it like that. Deere said, and they had to have some kind of pump, because if you hooked up the boat, it looks to me like all it would do is equalize pressure. I've never, ever, ever seen one filled up that way. From the whole time we were growing up, the way we filled them up, you had your little bleed right there, and there's one in the toolbox of every LP tractor that you buy in our part of the country. And you hook it up right up here on the bleed, open it up, hook liquid. Everybody's tanks, I think LPs run to the mafia, but at home for years you had an LP gas pricing structure that nobody could understand. I don't even think they could. You got one price for your house, you got one price if you had your pickup converted, you had another price if you had a tractor, you had another price if you were irrigating, you had another price if you were drying grain. So for years, every house you went by in Arkansas had either a 60 LP or a 720 LP sitting at the tank for the house that probably hadn't run in years because they got fuel cheap. But the tank, well, even though for home use, all your tank withdrawing off of the tank is vapor. But there's also a liquid withdrawal tube there, and you just put a valve in it, hook it up here, start bleeding vapor off. And a lot of people say, well, you're letting all your gas out. But remember the 250 to 1 deal. So, to put 20 gallons of liquid in it, you're not letting a whole lot of vapor back off of it. So that's the way we filled them up ever since I was big enough to remember. Starting and running. I kind of get amazed. I talked about the working world and our world and the vapor versus liquid myth. If you look in the book, it'll tell you to start the tractor on vapor and switch it to liquid. Well, if you're pulling the tractor, sure. But in our world, where you're never pulling them, you're playing with them, I'd never open the liquid valve. One, that's just 2 valves to wear out instead of 1. And 2, you don't need it. And a lot of people tell me, man, my tractor makes so much more power on liquid than it does on vapor. No, because you're getting 6 PSI vapor out of that converter going into the tractor, whether you're running vapor into it or whether you're running liquid into it. Where the rub comes is if you're pulling the tractor hard and you're pulling vapor out of the tank quicker than it can form, then yes, it's going to fall on its face and obviously start starving for fuel. But the way we run them, I think that's kind of a throwback to the old start them on gas, switch them to kerosene or whatever deal. I never open the liquid valves on my tractors. What do you do if the converter freezes? If it's in the morning, go have a couple of cups of coffee. If it's in the afternoon, a couple of beers or whatever the beverage of your choice, because you're done until it thaws. And what happens is, that's why you want to let the coolant temperature warm up if you are going to switch it to liquid if you're pulling the tractor hard. Now, the way we operate them, you couldn't freeze one up if you tried. But if you're pulling it hard and you open that liquid valve before the coolant temperature is up enough, the whole fuel system will turn to a solid block of ice. The converter will be a block of ice that big around, the strainer, all the lines, the valves, and you might as well just walk away. Don't build a fire under it. Just walk away from it till it thaws.
Water pump start working right on a cool morning.
Yep, water pump not working right on the cool morning.
It will freeze up and not run.
We had a 40-20 LP at deer camp a while back, and And I had just parked it right in front of the cabin where we were spending the night, and I was disking in that field, and the next morning, I just walked out, fired it up, and throwed the disc in the ground and opened the liquid valve and ran 6 feet, and boom. And looked down, and the converter was a block of ice that big around. And just, you're done till it thaws. Common problem. Just about the gurgling in the air cleaner we talked about. If you turn your clicker on and you hear your air cleaner gurgling, then you're bypassing fuel through there. You got a diaphragm problem, either a low pressure, high pressure, LP in the radiator we talked about, antifreeze in the oil, no gas at the converter we talked about. Make sure that I had a call from a guy the other day. He called me several times on this. I get 4 or 5 calls a year on people trying to start LP tractors without the oil cup on. But this guy said, damn 630 won't start. So I can squirm the ether in it, and it'll start right up, run till it quits. And so he had emailed me, he didn't call me. So I kind of went through a checklist of things, and then when I got down to is your intake system hooked up? He hit me back, and he said, no, I rebuilt the carburetor, and I hadn't hooked the intake system up. And I said, well, hook it up, and it'll run. And he said, well, I've been I need to put a piece of cardboard over it, and it won't run. I said, well, look, that might not be all of your problem, but it ain't going to run till you hook the intake system. And he called me back, thought I was a genius, you know, but it's, I get several of those a year, and it's just the way it takes fuel. Another common call I get is mine won't run unless I got the quote choke out. Well, there's one of two things wrong. First thing that's most likely wrong is starving for air. And first thing to check is the whole air cleaner system to make sure it's not full of dirt on it. That 620 I've got out here, when I bought it, I didn't have a trailer back in those days, and I drove it from Perry, Oklahoma to Stillwater, and it was running so rich, I cried the whole time. And you shouldn't smell basically any fumes much from an LP tractor. And I thought, man, I got to rebuild a converter on this thing, just like everybody else thinks. But they had put the air cleaner stack on sideways, and I didn't like the way it looked. So when I got home, I was going to put it back like it ought to be, and I just happened to turn it over and look in it, and you couldn't have packed another dirt dauber nest in it. And that tractor is a magnet for dirt daubers, and there'll be at least one in it every time I get ready to start it. It's real finicky on air mixture, and you can always tell it. If you go through the air first, if that's the problem. And then if you find your air system's open, then the converter's bypassing fuel. It's either pushing too much high pressure fuel through that's overpowering your little 6 PSI valve, or your little 6 PSI valve, low pressure valve's leaking, one of the two. Because what you're doing when you're pulling that choke out, you're shutting fuel off and balancing air fuel. Now, it'll make it sound like it'll run, but it wouldn't pull a hat off your head, but it'll at least make it sound like it's running okay. There's the air cleaner the other day. My dirt dauber nest doesn't show up, but there's one up in there, and there's one that had fallen down in the bottom on the 620. I mean, there'll be one in it every time I get ready to start it if it's set. Just a little bit on trinkets and goodies. Your keep valve closed where engine stop pretty much always goes where the valves are. On the 2 digits or down on that panel on the side. Also on the Dubuque tractors, you'll have a liquid and a vapor that go on your valve handles that are not on the Waterloo tractors. You'll also have an Underwriters Laboratory sticker. I don't know for sure why, but on a Dubuque, it goes down on the little hood like on Kenny's out there and Lee's. Theirs are on correct. If you want to go look at their tractors. Also on a Dubuque, you've got a vapor fill, even though you put liquid in it. But remember what you'd be withdrawing if you withdrew fuel there. And vapor return tags on the filler valves that are also not on the Waterloo tractor. And then also you've got a pressure tag that goes behind the fill valve when it screws in the tank. And that's just kind of all correct stuff for a Dubuque. There's the one that goes behind the fill valve when it screws in the tank. There they are, kind of just laid out on a piece of paper with the part numbers. And anybody that wants that, just call me, and I'll be happy to email it to you. But that's all the correct ones with the part numbers, and Travis Jordy makes all of those. if you need them, and his reproductions look pretty good. I mean, they're pretty good. Like I said, the only one, in my opinion, he's got wrong is this one. They send it to you painted green, and in my opinion, they were never painted green. Did it or didn't it? The Dubuque tractors with the LP sticker on the side of the tank, I've seen them both ways. And so in my opinion, either way is correct. That's one that Horn's got. It almost looks like they were painted on there. And I also had believed at one time they were only on the right side of the tank, but his tractor has it on both sides of the tank. Now, whether somebody painted it on there or not, I don't know, but I think yours is right, Kenny, with it on both sides of the tank. I think it's a personal preference. I prefer not to put them on mine, but if you choose to put it on, it's perfectly correct. And I think they were more on the earlier ones than perhaps on the later ones. And I don't think they were ever on the 30 series, but I'm not 100% sure about that. On a 20 series or a 2-digit, that Underwriters Laboratory goes right there, kind of right up on the curve. If you look at my 620 LP standard out there, it's original and still has most of it. On the 30 series tractors, it goes right up on top of the dash, or up on top of the casting between the dash and the lid up there. Serial numbers on a Dubuque built doesn't say LP, it only says L, or does it? A lot of the early ones didn't have the L in the tag. Most of the 125s and the 126 serial numbers I've seen did not have the L in the tag. Most of the later ones did. The Waterloo built tractors had LP in the tag. And I'm just going to end up with one kind of interesting one. That is a 520 LP. Look at the serial number pretty close, 00015. And the first one that JR said was number 17, but the first 20-something weren't archived by fuel type. And that's obviously an LP tractor. It was an engineering tractor, shipped to engineering. Also know, Lee and I both do where number 16 is, and it's also a factory LP tractor. I've got that tractor there, but you can see there was a little more hand stamping going on in the tag and stuff there, probably because it was an engineering tractor. So probably bored y'all way too long, but that's it. You know everything I know, probably more. I'd be happy to I'd take any questions if seats are not flat.
Where do you go to talk to JR?
Where do you go to talk to JR? I don't think I want to have to go to talk to JR. No, I'm judging, and that shouldn't be.
Thank you for it.
Okay.